Every mystery begins with a quiet lie. For Clara Higgins, her world was perfectly predictable. Organic duck pâté, filtered water, and the immense, comforting silence of the Vance estate. But when the mansion's wealthy owner, Eleanor Vance, suddenly vanishes and a priceless sapphire brooch is stolen, the silence turns deadly. The official investigation, led by the hyper-logical detective Nick Sterling, dismisses the case of the simple open-and-shut robbery. But Sterling hasn't accounted for the only witness, Mittens. Mittens, the pampered Himalayan cat, is communicating the truth in secrets. A mysterious patch of remote mud, the lingering scent of a hated cologne, and a cryptic code hidden within a shredded piece of paper. Clara must translate the cat's anxieties and use her unorthodox clues to uncover a conspiracy far bigger than jewelry, a plot tied to 100-year-old blueprints and the very foundation of the town hall. Tonight, the storm is raging, the clock is ticking to a midnight rendezvous, and the fate of an entire town rests on a pet sitter's intuition. Get ready for a thrilling, unique ride. Pet Sitter versus Detective, The Stolen Brooch and the Blueprint Conspiracy. Chapter 1. The morning sun, filtered through the blooming dogwood trees lining Primrose Lane, cast stripes of gold across the porch of the Vance estate. Inside, Clara Higgins was methodically polishing a silver butter dish, a task definitely not included in her pet-sitting contract, but one she undertook with the quiet, obsessive focus that defined her existence. Clara, a woman in her mid-30s with a perpetually half-knitted cardigan and a determined set to her chin, was the proprietor of Critter Comforts, Willow Creek's most discreet and, some said, most eccentric pet-sitting service. While others advertised walkies and tummy rubs, Clara promised positive communication, a slightly awkward term she used to describe her knack for interpreting the complex emotional needs of animals. Her current client was the most prestigious and certainly the most demanding of her career, Mittens. Mittens was a Himalayan cat of formidable fluff and severe dignity. He belonged to Mrs. Eleanor Vance, the town's wealthiest and most intensely private philanthropist, who was currently enjoying a supposed week-long retreat at an exclusive spa in the mountains. Mittens, however, was in residence, overseeing his domain, a domain that required unwavering adherence to a rigorous schedule. 8:30, Mittens, Clara murmured, checking her antique pocket watch. Breakfast is served. On the dot. I trust your digestive system is prepared for the organic duck pâté. Mittens, currently stationed atop the pristine white fireplace mantel, did not move. He was a creature of profound silence, his sapphire blue eyes holding the disdain of 1,000 generations of royalty. He simply blinked, slowly, regally, like a tiny, furry despot acknowledging a particularly tedious petition. Clara scooped the pâté into Mittens' designated ceramic bowl, hand-painted, naturally, placing it precisely 2 inches from the edge of the antique Persian rug. The routine was Clara's comfort zone. The rigid structure of Mittens' needs perfectly complemented her own slightly scattered, hyper-observant nature. For 3 days, everything had been flawlessly mundane. The 8:30 feeding, the 10 o'clock sunbathing on the south-facing chaise lounge, and the 3 o'clock mandatory 20-minute silent cuddle session. Mittens' rules, not hers. But today, something was different. Mittens descended from the mantel, approached his bowl, and then stopped. He didn't eat. Instead, his ears swiveled, not toward the kitchen or the front door, but toward the corner of the lavish drawing room, his gaze fixed on a tall, dark piece of furniture, a magnificent, heavily carved mahogany secretary desk. It was locked, imposing, and clearly a repository for Mrs. Vance's most private affairs. Clara followed the cat's stare. What is it, sweet boy? A dust mote? A particularly intriguing piece of air? Mittens let out a sound that wasn't a meow, but a low, guttural chirp, reserved only for moments of extreme displeasure or profound concentration. He padded silently across the rug, not toward the sunny window, but directly to the desk. He didn't claw at it or rub against it. He simply sat, his massive plume of a tail wrapped neatly around his paws, staring at the brass-plated lock. Clara knelt beside him, running a calming hand over his impossibly soft fur. "You're off your routine, pal. That's very un-Mittens-like." She leaned closer to the desk, running her fingers along the ornate carving. It looked undisturbed, save for a faint, almost invisible scratch just beneath the keyhole. Not the deep gouge of an amateur burglar, but a tiny, telling abrasion, maybe from a hurried key or a slipped tool. It smelled like metal and a hint of old rose perfume, Clara thought, her nose twitching instinctively. Suddenly, Mittens surged upward, arching his back and hissing, not at the desk, but at the air just above it, a pure, unmistakable sound of alarm. Then, just as quickly, he collapsed back into a sphinx-like pose, his eyes now wide and gleaming, as if he had just realized the gravity of a terrible, unspoken secret. "You're telling me something, aren't you?" Clara whispered. She knew she sounded crazy, but in her world, pets were the most honest witnesses. Is there something inside that desk that shouldn't be, or something that was inside that isn't now? Mittens let out a tiny, soft, almost human meow, a sound of deep, resigned worry. He nudged his head gently against her hand, a rare show of affection, before turning back toward his forgotten breakfast, his internal world apparently too heavy for simple duck pâté. Clara stood up slowly, her heart now thrumming a quickened rhythm against her ribs. The scratch, the smell, the cat's profound deviation from his gospel-like routine. It wasn't a dust mote, it was a message. Something had happened here, inside the silent, velvet walls of the Vance estate, and Mittens, the dignified, routine-obsessed sentinel, knew exactly what it was. Clara pulled out her phone, ostensibly to text Mrs. Vance, but the moment she pulled up the number, she hesitated. Mrs. Vance had explicitly said, "No calls, dear. Total detox. Only contact me if Mittens is in mortal peril." She looked at the perfectly healthy, well-fed, and deeply agitated cat. Was existential worry about a broken routine mortal peril? Probably not. She pocketed the phone, but the decision was made. She wasn't just a pet sitter anymore. If Mittens was concerned about the state of the Vance estate, then Clara Higgins, pet communicator, was now officially on the case. She just needed Mittens to lead her again. She picked up the discarded butter dish, her mind already racing through the small-town suspects she'd met on her rounds. The game, quiet and deeply cozy, was officially afoot. Clara stared at Mittens, who now sat guarding the abandoned pâté bowl, his tail twitching in slow, deliberate strokes, a metronome counting down to disaster. The morning light, which had promised a day of cozy, small-town domesticity, now felt cold and judgmental. "All right, Mittens," Clara sighed, crossing the thick Persian rug. "You've successfully derailed your breakfast, which, according to the Vance House rules, is equivalent to an act of civil disobedience. Talk to me." She tried to herd him gently toward the kitchen, attempting to reestablish the routine she craved. But Mittens, a creature who usually yielded to the slightest pressure, became a solid, immovable block of angora. He dug his claws into the carpet, a cardinal sin in Mrs. Vance's house, and his eyes, fixed once more on the mahogany secretary desk, held a panicked, crystalline intensity. He's not just upset about the routine, Clara realized. He's urgently trying to communicate. Clara stopped trying to lead him. Instead, she followed his gaze back to the desk. This piece of furniture, normally just a heavy, expensive backdrop, now seemed to hold all the secrets of Willow Creek. "Show me," Clara whispered, treating the command as she would a complicated trick for one of her more gifted terrier clients. "Positive communication, Mittens. Show me the trouble." Mittens took the cue. He bounded toward the desk, a surprising burst of speed from such a voluminous cat. Instead of simply staring, he did something utterly out of character. He clawed, not in a destructive rage, but a series of quick, targeted little snags right at the brass keyhole. Snick, snick, snick. He backed away, shaking his paw with an almost surgical fastidiousness. As he retreated, a tiny, almost invisible sliver of silver thread, snagged from the upholstery of the nearby visitor's chair, fluttered to the floor near the lock. But more importantly, stuck delicately to the white fur between Mittens' front claws, was a nearly microscopic dusting of metallic residue. Clara crouched down immediately, pulling out the tiny magnifying glass she kept on her keyring for inspecting plant pests. She focused the lens on the keyhole. The scratch she had noticed earlier wasn't a casual mark. Under magnification, she could see a faint, dark smudge and tiny, glinting brass shavings, the residue of metal grinding against metal. Someone hadn't just tried to open this desk. Someone had forced the lock. A cold certainty settled in Clara's stomach, replacing the buttery warmth of the morning. Eleanor Vance was wealthy, but the secretary desk was known to hold only one thing of external value: the Willow Creek sapphire brooch. It wasn't just expensive, it was historically significant, said to have been worn by the town founder's wife, and Eleanor routinely showed it off in the top locked drawer of this very desk. First, she needed to rule out a simple case of misplaced keys. Clara knew Mrs. Vance's secret hiding spot. She once had to retrieve medication from the safe while Eleanor was traveling. She hurried to the library, pulling down the complete, leather-bound edition of The History of Willow Creek. Inside the hollowed-out spine, nestled in velvet, was the ornate, antique skeleton key for the secretary desk. The spare key was here, untouched. This confirmed it. The lock had been picked or jimmied, not opened clumsily by a nervous relative. Clara returned to the drawing room, her amateur sleuth instincts overriding her pet sitter training. She carefully used a thin, strong wire from her knitting bag, angling it into the jimmied keyhole. With a gentle, slow pressure and the guiding glow of her phone's flashlight, she heard a soft, mechanical click. The main writing surface of the secretary desk dropped open with a low, heavy thud. The interior was pristine, organized into cubbies and small drawers, smelling faintly of cedar and mothballs. But the small, central strongbox compartment, the one Mrs. Vance always used for her jewels, was not merely open. The small wooden door was slightly ajar, hanging crookedly on one hinge. Clara's heart hammered a frantic beat against her ribs. She pulled the door open the rest of the way. The compartment was empty. The Willow Creek sapphire brooch, the single most valuable non-real estate asset in Eleanor Vance's possession, was gone. Mittens watched her, utterly still, his ears pinned back against his massive head. He didn't need to speak. His silent, resigned terror was clearer than any confession. The severity of this situation crashed over Clara. A break-in and a theft of a museum-worthy piece of jewelry, that was bad enough. But Eleanor was supposed to be at a spa. Clara rushed to the phone, looking up the number Eleanor had provided for the Serene Springs Wellness Retreat. A cheerful yet overly serene voice answered. "Serene Springs, where quiet contemplation awaits. How may I blissfully assist you?" "Yes, I need to speak to Eleanor Vance, please. She is registered there for a week-long stay."
One moment. Vance. Ah, yes, Eleanor Vance. Ma'am, according to our records, Miss Vance has canceled her reservation 2 days ago. We haven't seen her. Clara felt the floor tilt beneath her. Eleanor hadn't just gone on a retreat. Eleanor had been missing for 2 days, and the desk, the only thing keeping the theft a secret, had been forced open sometime in that window. This wasn't a case of a broken routine. This was a missing person and a felony theft. Clara looked at the brass filings on the rug, the open desk, and the cat whose silent alarm had been the only honest witness. Her knitting bag dropped from her numb fingers. She didn't call the local non-emergency line. Willow Creek's Deputy Bob would probably just ask her if the cat needed a tranquilizer. She found the Maine County Sheriff's number and dialed it, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in her hands. Yes, hello. My name is Clara Higgins. I'm a pet sitter at the Eleanor Vance residence on Primrose Lane. I believe there has been a substantial theft, and I believe Mrs. Vance might be missing. Mittens, hearing the serious tone in her voice, finally padded over to her, rubbing his huge, fluffy body against her ankle in a gesture that said, "Thank goodness. Someone finally understood." Clara braced herself. She knew the second thing she'd have to say to the authorities, that a Himalayan cat had led her straight to the crime scene. She was ready to be called eccentric, but she also knew she was right. The quiet drama of Willow Creek was about to get very loud, and she and Mittens were at the center of it.
Chapter 3. The tranquility of Primrose Lane was shattered by the arrival of 2 vehicles, a slightly battered, olive-green county sheriff's SUV, and trailing behind it, a sleek, unmarked black sedan that looked utterly out of place against the backdrop of quaint picket fences and rose bushes. Deputy Bob, a man whose uniform always seemed just a size too tight and whose mustache was perpetually dusted with sugar from the Willow Creek Bakery, arrived first. He was visibly rattled. "Clara, what in the name of pet sitting is going on here?" Deputy Bob wheezed, adjusting his belt. He was much more comfortable dealing with stray raccoons than jewel heists and missing persons. Before Clara could launch into her detailed, cat-led explanation, the door of the black sedan opened and out stepped Detective Nick Sterling. He wasn't from Willow Creek, and that was immediately obvious. He wore a crisp, navy suit, carried a slim leather briefcase, and moved with the focused, economical gait of a man who dealt exclusively in facts, not feelings. He had dark, neatly trimmed hair and eyes the color of a stormy Atlantic, deeply serious, and currently directed with laser precision at the jimmied secretary desk. He surveyed the lavish drawing room, the velvet fainting couch, the oil portraits, the horrified Deputy Bob, and then his gaze settled on Clara. "Detective Sterling, County Division," he said, his voice low, professional, and entirely devoid of Willow Creek's habitual, cozy drawl. "You're Miss Higgins, the pet sitter. Can you walk me through what you found, and when?" Clara felt a sudden, uncharacteristic flush. Nick Sterling was startlingly handsome, but it was his complete lack of warmth, his intense focus that made her nerves sing. He made her feel instantly visible and simultaneously slightly ridiculous. "Of course, Detective," Clara said, trying to steady her hands. "It began this morning precisely at 8:30. That is when Mittens, Mrs. Vance's Himalayan cat, refused his organic duck pâté." Nick paused, one elegant eyebrow arching just enough to convey his immediate, profound skepticism. He glanced down at Mittens, who was now impeccably positioned in a sunbeam, grooming his chest fur with a display of calculated indifference. "Mittens," Nick repeated, writing something on a small pad. "The cat. Right." Clara pressed on, determined to convey the gravity of the cat's evidence. "Mittens is a creature of absolute routine, Detective. A disruption of his schedule is usually an indicator of environmental stress.
He led me straight to the secretary's desk. She pointed to the faint brass residue on the rug. He showed me the scratch near the keyhole, and he was agitated by the lack of the Willow Creek sapphire brooch. Nick knelt by the desk, not to look at the brass filings, but to carefully examine the forced lock mechanism. He was thorough, using a tiny penlight and a careful touch, and didn't interrupt her explanation about feline intuition. This, Clara realized, wasn't respect. This was patience before dismissal. So, to be clear, Miss Higgins, you discovered Mrs. Vance was missing after calling her spa. You discovered the brooch was stolen after using a wire from your knitting bag to gain access to the strongbox. I used the spare key hidden in a library first, Clara corrected quickly, defensive of her amateur procedure. I only used the wire to demonstrate that the desk had been forced before I found the spare key was still hidden. The jimmied lock proved the theft. And the cat's role in this? Clara hesitated. He was the catalyst. He alerted me to the disturbance. He sensed the violation of the house's established order. Nick sighed, a quiet, almost imperceptible sound that conveyed utter weariness with the eccentricities of small-town witnesses. Ms. Higgins, while I appreciate your affection for the animal, people steal things every day. Locks are picked. Cats are creatures of habit. Mittens was probably just annoyed that his favorite sunspot was blocked by the heavy shadow of a large, expensive piece of furniture. The sunbeam was on the chaise lounge, detective, an area Mittens usually occupies at 10 sharp. He was at the desk at 8:30. That's a 90-minute deviation. Clara insisted, feeling her own professional pride rising. She knew animals. He was dismissing the truth because it was inconveniently furry. Nick simply handed Deputy Bob a small plastic evidence bag. Bob, bag these shavings. Miss Higgins, I need you to understand something. This is a complex case now. Missing person, grand larceny. The last thing we need is an amateur, however well-intentioned, complicating the scene. We will handle the investigation. Your job is to continue caring for Mittens. He looked down at the Himalayan, who looked back with an air of superior knowledge, and then back at Clara. Stick to the duck pâté, Miss Higgins. Leave the police work to the police. The dismissal stung, but it also lit a fuse. Clara's quirky exterior hid a backbone of pure stubbornness. She watched Nick Sterling establish a perimeter, efficiently photographing the damage and taking notes on Mrs. Vance's disappearance. He was good. Clinical, sharp, and focused, but he was also blind to the most cruciate piece of evidence in the room, the silent, fluffy witness. Clara walked to the kitchen to fetch Mittens' actual breakfast, a plan beginning to form in her mind. If Nick needed hard facts, she would provide them, and the source of those facts, the animals of Willow Creek. Mittens finally condescended to eat, but he kept glancing toward the driveway, his nose twitching. He was reacting to a scent that had nothing to do with Mrs. Vance and everything to do with the outside world. The theft happened, the brooch is gone, and Mrs. Vance is missing, Clara mused, watching Mittens' ears track a sound only he could hear. But who profits? She remembered the town gossip, the fierce rivalry between Eleanor Vance and the antiques dealer Silas Albright over a shared ancestral property line. Silas was notoriously hot-headed, and his antique shop happened to be just 2 blocks from the Vance estate, along Mittens' regular perimeter walk. A theory, a very Mittens-approved theory, formed in her mind. She would follow the cat's lead and investigate Silas Albright's property. After all, Nick Sterling had only told her not to tamper with this crime scene. He hadn't said anything about her not walking Mittens around the neighborhood. The real investigation, the one led by positive communication, was about to begin.
Chapter 4. The idea of walking Mittens was, in a word, ambitious. Mittens was an indoor cat, a pristine white cloud of Himalayan perfection whose entire existence revolved around climate control and filtered water. Introducing him to the complexities of asphalt, dandelions, and the sheer audacity of a passing squirrel was a task Clara approached with the solemnity of an astronaut preparing for a spacewalk. After Detective Sterling had efficiently cordoned off the drawing room and departed to interview other staff, who were apparently on extended leave, a fact that deepened Clara's suspicion of Eleanor Vance's mysterious disappearance, Clara retrieved the luxury escape harness from the utility drawer. It was an elaborate contraption of soft gold-threaded silk and tiny silver clasps, looking less like pet gear and more like a miniature royal accessory. "This is for positive communication, Mittens," Clara explained as she gently guided his legs through the loops. "The outdoor world holds the truth, and you, my dear, are the only one who can sniff it out." Mittens submitted to the harness with the long-suffering resentment of a monarch's forced to attend a peasant fair. Outside, the midday sun of Willow Creek was warm, and the air smelled of freshly cut grass and the sweet perfume of the town's namesake willow trees. Mittens, however, reacted as if he had been lowered onto the surface of Mars. He flattened himself against the stone walkway, his massive tail expanding into a furious bottle brush, his breathing shallow and rapid. Clara knelt, coaxing him. "Breathe, Mittens. It's just pollen. We're going 2 blocks over, to Mr. Albright's shop. Remember Silas Albright, the one who argued with Mrs. Vance about that property line last month? The one whose voice makes you hide under the fainting couch?" At the mention of Silas Albright, his ears twitched and he shifted. It wasn't curiosity that motivated him, but a deep, territorial dislike. Slowly, painstakingly, Clara managed to guide the fluffy, reluctant detective down Primrose Lane. The Vance estate stood apart, a monument to old money and immaculate taste. Silas Albright's shop, the Crooked Hearth Antiques, was the exact opposite. A rambling, slightly dilapidated Victorian house that served both as his residence and his store. It was crammed with relics, rusty tools, stacked furniture, and items that looked suspiciously like junk, all overflowing onto the cracked asphalt driveway. As they neared the shop, Mittens became less terrified and more intensely focused. His head lowered, his nose began working, not sniffing the general air, but tracing a precise line along the ground near the overgrown hedge that marked the property line shared with the Vance estate. Clara kept the leash slack, allowing him to lead. She looked down and saw what had captured his attention. The driveway near the back entrance wasn't paved well. It was a mix of gravel and hard-packed dirt, and running across a patch of this dirt was a distinct, fresh set of tire tracks, deep enough to suggest a large vehicle had been there recently. Mittens suddenly stopped dead at the edge of the tire track, his attention fixed on a tiny, sticky clump of mud embedded in the gravel. He sniffed it deeply, then let out a low, almost satisfied huff, a sound Clara recognized as a confirmation of a known scent. He then proceeded, in the most insulting way possible, to scratch at the dirt clump, kicking it backward with his hind paws. "He's marking the spot," Clara thought, marveling at his detective skills. "He is confirming this mud is important." Clara carefully bent down, pretending to adjust the harness. The soil was a peculiar shade, dark, loamy, and faintly clay-like, absolutely distinct from the sandy, carefully composted topsoil of the Vance gardens. It was the kind of rich, earthy mud you found on the far side of Willow Creek, where the town faded into undeveloped farmland, perhaps near the abandoned tulip farm she'd heard mentioned in passing. She subtly scraped a small sample of the mud, along with a few bits of gravel, into a small, clean plastic baggie she had wisely brought, labeling it mentally Exhibit A, Albright Driveway Mud. Just as she sealed the baggie, a booming voice startled her. "What in the blazes are you doing on my property, Clara Higgins?" Silas Albright emerged from the gloomy interior of his shop. He was a man with a perpetually furrowed brow, a vest coat stained with polishing wax, and a loud, aggressive air. He looked exactly like the type of man who would steal a priceless brooch out of spite. "Mr. Albright,
"Just enjoying a midday constitution with Mittens," Clara replied, brightly, holding the cat, who was now trying to burrow into her cardigan, like a furry shield. Silas scowled, his eyes narrowed on Mittens. "That pampered beast, he looks like a dust mop that swallowed a tennis ball. And why are you walking him? Eleanor Vance never let that cat off the grounds." "Mrs. Vance is indisposed," Clara said, careful with her words. "A change in routine is necessary. I trust you haven't seen her around." Silas snorted, throwing his hands up in a gesture of dramatic innocence. "Why would I? She hates my guts, and the feeling, let me tell you, is entirely mutual. That woman thinks she owns this town, right down to the weeds on my property line. I hope she's enjoying her spa with her ill-gotten gains." His eyes darted nervously toward the Vance property, then quickly back to Clara. "And what's the police presence over there?" Silas demanded, his voice dropping slightly, laced with greedy curiosity. "Did someone finally tell the taxman about that ridiculous income she keeps dodging? I wouldn't put it past her to just vanish to avoid paying up." Clara gave a tight, polite smile. "I'm sure Detective Sterling will keep the community informed. We just needed a bit of fresh air, that's all. Come on, Mittens." She quickly retreated, pulling Mittens along the sidewalk. Silas stood in his doorway, watching them with a mixture of resentment and something that looked very much like ill-concealed triumph. He was the perfect suspect, loud, publicly motivated, and clearly holding a long-standing grudge. But as Clara rounded the corner, she looked down at the plastic baggie in her pocket. Silas Albright might have the motive, but the rich, dark mud on his driveway, confirmed by Mittens' nose, suggested he had recently been somewhere far more remote than his own messy yard. He was too easy, too obvious. The mud was her first piece of physical evidence, and it pointed not just to Silas Albright, but to a specific, secret location outside the cozy confines of Primrose Lane. The rival was a red herring, but the dirt was the truth. Clara hurried back to the Vance house, her mind churning, the smell of dark soil replacing the scent of organic duck pate. She had a new goal, mapping the soil types of Willow Creek.
Chapter 5. Back inside the opulent, silent prison of the Vance estate, Clara set up her makeshift laboratory in the kitchen. She spread the sample of dark, loamy soil on a pristine white linen napkin, comparing it to a small pinch of the Vance Garden's sandy, expensive compost. The difference was stark. The mud from Silas Albright's driveway was dense, rich, and held a distinctive moisture, the unmistakable clay found only in the neglected wetlands on the outskirts of Willow Creek, specifically near the old, abandoned Vanderbloom tulip farm. Silas had definitely been out there recently, Clara concluded, wiping her hands clean. He's either lying about his alibi, or he was simply picking up some excellent, illicit soil for his own small garden. Either way, his nervous energy near the tire tracks wasn't just about me. But the mud was a directional clue, not a smoking gun. She needed a link between the tulip farm mud and the stolen brooch. She carried Mittens, still clad in gold-threaded harness, though slightly less rigid with terror, back into the drawing room. Detective Sterling's crime scene tape and a officious strip of yellow plastic now crisscrossed the secretary desk, making it frustratingly inaccessible. "Okay, my furry friend," Clara whispered, holding Mittens near the base of the desk. "We found where the culprit went, but what did he leave here? The scratch was a signal. What else did you sense?" Mittens didn't move. He simply stared at the tape, clearly viewing it as an insult to his investigative authority. Clara carefully peeled back a small section of the tape, just enough to expose the bottom edge of the desk and the dark, ornate trim that met the wooden floorboards. Clara noticed a faint, almost invisible gap along the skirting board, right where the desk cast its heaviest shadow.
She ran her finger along the join, and Mittens suddenly sprang to life, batting impatiently at the spot. His persistence was confirmation. Clara took a silver letter opener, a heavy, uncomfortably ornate object from the mantelpiece, and carefully inserted the point into the gap. She applied gentle leverage, easing the old board up a hair at a time. The wood creaked in protest, but finally, a small section of the floorboard lifted slightly, revealing a shallow, dark recess beneath. Nestled in the dust and cobwebs was a single, tiny piece of paper, folded multiple times into a tight, rectangular packet, the kind of packet someone would instinctively hide in a hurry. Clara's breath caught. This was it, the secret the desk was protecting, the reason Mittens had stood guard. She reached in, pulling out the fragile, aged paper. Just as she began to unfold it, Mittens, in an instant of sheer feline opportunism, pounced. Whether he was trying to reclaim his prize, destroy the evidence, or just assert his dominance over the dusty paper, Clara couldn't be sure. There was a sickening, fast shredding sound. "Mittens, no!" Clara yelped, pulling the remaining paper away. She had managed to salvage only 2/3 of the note. The top section was gone, pulverized into damp, fluffy confetti by Mittens' determined claws. What remained was heartbreakingly incomplete. Empty shredded text. 555.tulip.ln. Tuesday 10 p.m. Burn everything. Tulip Lane, Clara breathed, her mind racing. 555.tulip.ln. That confirmed her soil theory. It was the address for the old Vanderbloom tulip farm, the very remote swampy area linked to Silas Albright's muddy tires. But what was missing? The beginning of the note. Who wrote it? Who was going to meet whom? And was Tuesday the day Eleanor disappeared, or the day of the planned theft? Suddenly, a brisk, decisive knock echoed through the large hallway, followed immediately by the sound of a door opening. "Miss Higgins, I need to speak with you." It was Detective Sterling. He stopped dead in the doorway of the drawing room, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly as he took in the scene. Clara kneeling by the corner of the secretary desk, the freshly pried-up floorboard at her feet, and Mittens enthusiastically chewing a piece of white paper fluff. Nick's professional calm vanished, replaced by a deep, palpable frustration. His eyes, stormy gray before, were now thunderous. "What in the actual hell are you doing, Miss Higgins?" he demanded, stepping over the crime scene tape she'd breached. "I specifically instructed you to leave the evidence alone. That tape is there for a reason." Clara quickly scrambled up, tucking the scrap of paper into her apron pocket. "Detective Sterling, I was not tampering. I was utilizing the cat's superior scent tracking to locate secondary evidence. Mittens found this. It was hidden beneath a loose floorboard." "Beneath a floorboard you lifted with a silver letter opener," Nick countered, his voice dangerously low. He gestured toward the desk. "This isn't a scavenger hunt, Miss Higgins. You are impeding a live investigation and potentially contaminating evidence." "And you were ignoring the primary witness," Clara shot back, momentarily forgetting that police detectives weren't usually receptive to being lectured by pet sitters. "The cat led me to the mud on Silas Albright's driveway, which is the same clay soil as the tulip farm, and that address, 555.tulip.ln, was hidden right here. They're linked." Nick stared at the fresh damage to the floor. He wanted to dismiss her, but the visible, new hole in the floor contradicted his dismissal from the previous day. He softened his tone, but not his warning. "I appreciate that you are observant, Miss Higgins, but your positively communication theory is leading you to destroy evidence. That shred paper, it could have been the final piece. Now you've rendered it useless. From now on, you are not to investigate, not to pry, and not to use the furniture as a jungle gym for the cat. If I catch you contaminating this scene one more time, I will have you removed from the premises and formally charge you with obstruction. Do we understand each other?" Clara knew she was beaten, for now. She looked at Nick, then at Mittens, who blinked slowly, utterly unconcerned by the detective's rage. Clara said, "We understand, Detective Sterling." Nick Sterling left with a sharp turn, closing the door firmly behind him. Clara leaned back against the wall, catching her breath. The confrontation had been exhausting, but she had the clue. She gently pulled out the scrap of paper, 555.tulip.ln, Tuesday 10 p.m. Burn everything. A secret meeting at an abandoned tulip farm. A missing Brooch, a missing employer, and a cat who had just confirmed that Silas Albright was more involved than he let on. Clara had to get to that tulip farm, but first she had to figure out what day Tuesday was referring to, and she needed a way to check if anyone else, particularly the arrogant Detective Sterling, was involved with the case of Eleanor Vance's visiting relative. After the stormy encounter with Detective Sterling, Clara felt a familiar, defiant surge of adrenaline. She might be under strict orders to stick to the duck pate, but a true pet sitter knew that exceptional service sometimes required bending the rules. The evidence she had, the mud, the partial note, and the missing Eleanor, all suggested a carefully plotted internal affair, not just a random smash and grab by a grumpy antique dealer. She needed to understand the timeline better. When exactly had the intruder been in the house? Eleanor Vance had left 2 days ago. Clara had arrived yesterday. The desk was jimmied sometime in that window. Clara retreated to the only place in the house where she felt truly grounded, the pantry. It was here, amongst the imported olives and organic dog biscuits, that Eleanor Vance stored Mittens' most prized possession, freeze-dried Pacific salmon strips, reserved only for moments of extreme achievement, distress, or bribery. She held the little silver pouch out to Mittens. "You were magnificent, my furry colleague. You deserve a bonus." Mittens, however, remained profoundly uninterested. He turned his head away, a gesture of disdain so absolute it felt like an emotional slap. This was deeply troubling. Mittens loved salmon strips the way Clara loved solving puzzles. It was an essential part of his life's meaning. "What is it, sweet boy? Are you still stressed?" Mittens only offered a small, disgusted sniffle. He would eat his regular food, but the special treat, the one she'd offered him moments after the crime, was refused. Clara decided to use this specific refusal as a psychological marker. Something had been in the air at the time of the break-in that made the salmon strips unpalatable. She began to meticulously clean the areas the police had processed, working around the yellow tape in the drawing room. Her dust cloth passed over Eleanor Vance's small, ornate vanity table tucked into an alcove. Eleanor had expensive taste, and her collection of perfumes and cosmetics was vast. As Clara tidied a few misplaced cologne bottles, her hand accidentally knocked over a tiny, dark glass vial. It didn't break, but the stopper came loose, releasing a concentrated plume of scent into the air. A heavy, musky, slightly sharp aroma of cedar and bergamot. Clara wrinkled her nose. It was a masculine scent, slightly overpowering. Mittens, lounging 3 feet away, reacted instantly. He stopped grooming. His ears swiveled forward like radar dishes, twitching violently at the scent. His pupils dilated slightly, and he emitted a low, rumbling growl, a sound Clara rarely heard, reserved only for the mailman and the occasional thunderstorm. Then the remarkable happened. The intense aversion passed, replaced by a strange, almost nervous excitement. Mittens trotted over to the small, scattered spill of cologne, gave it one profound sniff, and then turned expectantly toward Clara. Clara, bewildered, reached for the silver bag of treats. "Salmon, is it? Now that the smell is here?" she asked, holding a strip out. Mittens took it instantly, delicately, and crunched it with gusto. He then looked up, demanding another. Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. The cat wasn't refusing the treat. He was refusing to take the treat unless that specific scent was present. It was a behavioral anomaly, a coded message in feline psychology. She immediately recognized the scent. It wasn't Eleanor's. It belonged to Julian Vance, Eleanor's handsome, smooth-talking, and utterly non-committal distant cousin. Julian had been visiting 2 weeks ago, ostensibly to discuss family business, though Clara heard through the Willow Creek grapevine that he was actually trying to secure a loan from Eleanor. She remembered another incident. A week prior, Clara had tried to give Mittens a special treat while Julian was in the room discussing wills and endowments with Eleanor. Mittens had refused. Julian had joked, "Looks like the fluffy brute is allergic to potential heirs." The scent was Julian's cologne. The cat was stressed by the presence of that scent around the time of the theft, and now, somehow, the scent had become associated with receiving his high-value reward. Why would the thief's scent make Mittens accept a treat? Clara theorized. The smell of Julian Vance's cologne had been intensely strong and pervasive at the time the brooch was stolen, overpowering the cat's anxiety. Mittens' high alert state had then been rewarded immediately afterwards with the salmon strips, forming a bizarre Pavlovian link. The scent of Julian Vance, the cousin who stood to inherit heavily, was the true emotional trigger. Julian Vance was supposed to be back in the city, but the distinct scent trail he left behind, confirmed by Mittens' unusual snack behavior, strongly suggested he was the one who had recently violated the quiet sanctity of the house. And the fact that the cologne bottle was here suggested he hadn't fully moved out, or had returned recently and secretly. Clara checked Eleanor's calendar. She'd circled a date 2 days ago, the day the cancellation at the spa occurred, and written in faint pencil, JV, lunch. Julian Vance had not only been in town recently, but he had an appointment with Eleanor Vance on the day she vanished, and his smell was still clinging to the drawing room. His motive? Inheritance and a potential loan refusal. Clara put the cologne vial away carefully. She had 2 paths now. The Tulip Farm address, linked to Silas Albraid's muddy tires, and the scent of Julian Vance, linked to the moment of the crime. She quickly grabbed her phone and subtly used the town's historical records app. Julian Vance, like all the Vance family, was staying at the Hearthside B&B when he was in Willow Creek. The B&B was run by Fiona, a kind woman who was notoriously protective of her guests' privacy. Clara knew she couldn't call. She had to take Mittens for another walk, this time to the Hearthside B&B. She needed to know if Julian was still in Willow Creek and if Fiona would provide him with an alibi. The salmon scent link was too powerful to ignore. "Time for another field trip, Sherlock Holmes," Clara murmured to the cat, who was now meticulously cleaning his face, smelling faintly of cedar and expensive freeze-dried fish. The mundane reality of the snack attack had just opened up a new path in the investigation.
Clara knew better than to just show up at the Hearthside B&B and ask Fiona, the owner, if her guest, Julian Vance, was a murderous thief. Fiona, a woman who treated guest privacy with the solemnity of an ancient sacred oath, would simply offer Clara a tray of aggressively wholesome lemon scones and politely escort her out. Clara needed a cover story, and crucially, a way to verify Julian's continued presence. Her solution was a small, aggressively cheerful bouquet of freshly picked hydrangeas from Mrs. Vance's garden, a welcome home gesture for Fiona's new spring guests. She arrived at the B&B with Mittens, once again reluctantly harnessed, tucked securely into a wicker basket, only his impossibly round head visible. "Mittens,
being a cat of exceptional taste, was predictably enraged by the clashing decor of the B&B's porch, too many painted signs, and a disconcerting number of ceramic gnomes. Fiona, a woman whose apron was always starched and whose smile was always set to a radiant, slightly alarming 100-watt level, accepted the flowers effusively. "Oh, Clara, these are just divine. You're such a thoughtful soul. And is that precious Mittens?" Fiona cooed, carefully avoiding contact with the royal Himalayan. "He needed the fresh air," Clara explained, positioning the basket near the communal guest seating area directly overlooking the main staircase. "I just wanted to make sure all your guests were settling in nicely. Mr. Vance, for instance, is he still here?" Fiona's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed with a practiced, protective discretion. "Oh yes, Julian, a charming man, truly. He's been here all week, keeping to himself, very busy on his laptop, bless him. He's such a dedicated fellow, so involved in family matters. He's been the perfect guest, hasn't left the premises, really. I bring him up a thermos of coffee every morning, right to his room." Too specific, too eager, Clara noted mentally. Fiona usually required a signed waiver and a blood oath before sharing a guest's first initial, let alone their daily movements. The speed and certainty of Julian's perfect alibi felt manufactured. Clara thanked Fiona and pretended to fuss with Mittens' harness, settling into a floral print armchair near the bay window. She only had to wait 5 minutes before Julian Vance, looking impeccably groomed in pressed linen trousers, descended the staircase. He carried a slim, leather portfolio and smelled faintly of the aggressive cologne that Mittens had confirmed. Julian paused in the doorway to pull on a pair of designer sunglasses, running a hand through his artfully messy brown hair. He had the air of a man who was used to getting exactly what he wanted. "Mornin', Fiona. Just running out for a quick call. I'll be back before lunch. Keep my breakfast warm, will ya?"
"Of course, Julian,"
Fiona trilled, waving him off. As Julian stepped out onto the porch, Clara carefully lifted Mittens from the basket, holding him close to her chest. Mittens, recognizing the scent of the man, issued a low, challenging meow and attempted to hide his face in Clara's shoulder, a clear sign of deep agitation and recognition. Clara watched Julian walk briskly down the sidewalk, heading toward the main square where the banks and municipal offices were located. She stood up ready to follow when a familiar, crisp voice spoke directly behind her. "Miss Higgins, still sticking to the duck pâté, are we?" Clara nearly jumped out of her sensible shoes. She whirled around to find Detective Nick Sterling standing just inside the B&B lobby, leaning against the doorframe, wearing his signature suit and an expression of long-suffering amusement. He nodded toward Julian Vance's retreating figure. "He's our guy, isn't he? The one who smells of expensive trouble?" The shock of finding Nick Sterling not only tailing the same suspect, but also acknowledging the cat's scent clue left Clara speechless. You're following him?" she finally managed. "Someone has to conduct the official investigation," Nick replied dryly. Julian Vance suddenly paid off a massive outstanding credit card debt 2 days ago. That's a large red flag in our book. The brooch is expensive enough to clear that debt and then some. And yes, your eccentric theory about the musky cologne was enough to make him worth a tale, as he has a known gambling problem. Clara felt a confusing swirl of vindication and annoyance. "So you do listen to the cat?" "I listen to data points, Miss Higgins. You provided a data point that led to Julian Vance being financially vetted. Now, since we have established a clear link between your suspect and my suspect, and since you've clearly established the B&B owner is entirely too eager to provide him with an airtight alibi, perhaps we should temporarily share notes. And since I'm already here, I wouldn't say no to Fiona's coffee. It smells excellent." Reluctantly, Clara and Nick sat down at a small, round table, the only piece of furniture not adorned with doilies. Fiona bustled over, overly pleased to serve the handsome detective. Clara recounted Fiona's overly defensive alibi, noting that Julian seemed to rely on Fiona's testimony of his presence rather than having independent, off-site witnesses. Nick, on his part, pulled out his notebook and pointed to a cryptic entry. My team found records that Julian Vance placed a large urgent call to Silas Albright 3 days ago, the day Eleanor disappeared. The call lasted 15 minutes. Clara frowned. Silas Albright, my mud suspect, the Tulip Lane note is tied to Silas's property. Julian Vance, your scent suspect, is suddenly calling Silas? They hate each other. Only for public consumption, Nick countered, swirling the coffee in his cup. Looks like the heir and the rival were collaborating, perhaps to pressure Eleanor into selling the property, or perhaps to simply rob her. The Tulip Farm address, your shredded note, that's their rendezvous point. Clara looked at the detective, sitting across from her in the aggressively floral parlor. She still found him frustratingly dismissive, but his mind was sharp, and the evidence he produced was concrete. So, who has the brooch? Clara asked, sinking her own skepticism. Julian, who has the debt and the alibi, or Silas, who has the mud and the grudge? Nick took a slow sip of coffee, his stormy eyes meeting hers. A good detective doesn't dismiss any evidence, Miss Higgins. The good pet sitter always knows where to look for clues. We both need to know what Julian and Silas were doing at 555 Tulip Lane. But first, we need to know what else Eleanor Vance was hiding. Clara watched him go, a strange sense of excitement bubbling up. Her investigation, led by a fluffy Himalayan, had just merged with the official county sheriff's office. The partnership was grudging, awkward, and probably temporary, but undeniably thrilling. She knew what her next move had to be. Julian's scent had led her back to the house. She needed to look where Julian and Eleanor would have held their JV lunch appointment. The most likely spot was not the drawing room, but the impeccable, prize-winning garden.
Chapter 8. Clara returned to the Vance estate with a new sense of urgency. Her arrangement with Detective Sterling was temporary and strictly non-committal, but the shared intelligence, Julian's debt, his call to Silas, and the Tulip Lane rendezvous meant the game was escalating from petty theft to organized crime. She needed to uncover Eleanor Vance's secret, the one she'd planned to discuss over their JV lunch. The garden, Eleanor Vance's pride and joy, was the most likely spot for a private conversation. It was a formal, multi-tiered space famous across Willow Creek for its pristine state. Eleanor employed a full-time gardener, but the man had been laid off 2 weeks prior due to his sudden, frugal mood, another oddity Clara hadn't thought much about until now. Clara took Mittens outside. This time, she didn't bother with the harness, she simply carried him. He tolerated the arrangement, occasionally peering over her shoulder like a fluffy, highly judgmental camera. The garden was beautiful but felt strangely sterile. The earth was perfectly mulched, the hedges precisely sheared. Clara walked the perimeter, looking for any sign of recent disruption, a carelessly snapped twig, a misplaced gardening tool, or a footprint in the soft soil. She stopped at the elaborate English rose bed, which featured Eleanor's prized Willow Creek sunset roses, a rare apricot-colored varietal. This section was supposed to be the most immaculate. Mittens suddenly stirred in her arms. Instead of his usual purring indifference, he emitted a low, distressed moan and began to frantically paddle his paws against Clara's shoulder, trying to get away from the rose bushes. His usual indifference had turned to outright terror. "What is it, sweet boy?" Clara murmured, gently setting him down a few feet away. Mittens didn't bolt back to the house. Instead, he held his ground, arching his back and staring intently at a specific section of the rosebed, a particularly voluminous bush of the prized sunset varietal. He wasn't attracted to the spot, he was intensely repulsed by it. Clara remembered Eleanor Vance boasting that Mittens hated this specific rosebush. He claims they smell too modern, Eleanor had once sniffed. Mittens usually refused to even walk near it. Today, his fear was magnified. Clara's intuition, honed by years of deciphering animal moods, clicked instantly. The cat wasn't repelled by the roses, he was repelled by the disturbance near the roses, or perhaps a strange scent left there. The gardener might have been fired, but this patch of earth was clearly disturbed. Clara knelt by the rosebush. The mulch around the base of the Willow Creek sunset looked exactly like the mulch everywhere else. But on closer inspection, the soil beneath it was slightly firmer, more packed down in one spot, and looked like it had been recently turned over and patted back into place. Clara fetched a small, decorative silver trowel from the potting shed. She carefully began to excavate the disturbed earth, working with the slow precision of an archaeologist, fearful of destroying whatever had triggered Mittens' dramatic exit. About 3 inches down, the trowel struck something hard and unyielding. Clara brushed away the remaining soil. What she uncovered was a small, black, waterproof flash drive. It was unremarkable, just a tiny piece of plastic and metal, but its presence, buried in Eleanor Vance's prize rosebed just days before her disappearance, felt immensely significant. She held the flash drive up to the sunlight. It was completely clean, suggesting it had been placed there deliberately and recently, likely right before Eleanor's JV lunch. Mittens, meanwhile, watched the flash drive with the same fearful aversion he had reserved for the spot where it was buried. Did Eleanor hide this, or was it left for her? Clara wondered. Did Julian or Silas bury something to coerce her, or was this her escape plan? The logical next step was to plug the drive into a computer. Clara hurried back inside, ignoring the caution of her better judgment. She couldn't risk giving this to Nick Sterling first. If it was evidence of Eleanor's potential misdeeds, Nick might focus only on that and ignore the stolen brooch and the danger Eleanor might be in. She slipped the flash drive into Eleanor Vance's antique but surprisingly modern laptop. The screen immediately populated with a single folder labeled Archive May 1903. Clara double-clicked. Inside there were not documents or financial ledgers, but high-resolution architectural blueprints. They were old, clearly dating back to the turn of the century, but recently scanned. The plans detailed the original layout of the Willow Creek Town Hall, the historical archives, and the surrounding municipal area. The blueprints, however, were not simply historical records. A few key locations on the maps had been highlighted in a neon yellow digital marker. The foundation of the old town hall, and a small, forgotten area deep within the archive's attic, labeled Founders Storage, sealed. Clara stared at the screen, bewildered. This wasn't about money or debt. It was about the town's history and a secret hidden within the very foundation of Willow Creek. Eleanor Vance, Julian Vance, and Silas Albright were fighting over real estate, not just a sapphire brooch. The brooch was historically significant, but perhaps it was merely a key or a distraction for something much older and potentially more valuable, something hidden in the town hall. Clara suddenly realized the Tulip Lane address, 555. Tulip Lane, wasn't just a rendezvous. The Tulip Farm was adjacent to the original Willow Creek stone quarry, where the materials for the town hall were sourced. The mud, the flash drive, the missing Eleanor, and the brooch were all linked to the town's founding secrets.
Just as Clara was contemplating calling Detective Sterling to share this stunning revelation, the laptop screen suddenly froze, then faded to black. The security system, a modern addition to the antique house, had detected an unauthorized device plugged into the primary network and instantly executed a safety shutdown, locking down all devices. Clara pulled the flash drive out, her stomach sinking. She had seen the blueprints, but now she was locked out of communication and evidence. She was sitting in a silent, lockdown house with a hypersensitive cat, a waterproof flash drive, and a dangerous secret about the town hall. Mittens, sensing the shift in the room's energy, patted over and gently headbutted her hand, silently urging her to continue. Clara knew what she had to do. She had to understand the blueprints, and only one person in Willow Creek dealt exclusively in obscure local history: Martha, the town archivist.
Chapter 9. The silence that fell over the Vance house after the security lockdown was heavy and oppressive. Clara was left alone in the drawing room, clutching the small black flash drive like a precious jewel. The antique laptop screen stubbornly dark. The blueprint images were vivid in her mind. The highlighted foundation of the town hall, the cryptic Founders Storage sealed marking, and the address 555-TULIPLN connecting everything to the outskirts of Willow Creek. The blueprints confirm Julian's involvement, Clara mused, pacing the carpet. He must have discovered a loophole, a valuable historical land right buried beneath the town hall, perhaps tied to the quarry. He and Silas Albright were planning a meeting at the tulip farm to finalize the deal, forcing Eleanor to sign over the rights, and the brooch was merely payment or collateral. Clara tried to piece together the remaining scrap of paper. Tuesday, 10 p.m. Burn everything. She assumed the Tuesday referred to the night of the planned rendezvous. If Eleanor had vanished on Monday, the thieves had panicked and moved their meeting up. The most logical place to start was the town hall, where the original blueprints indicated the secret was hidden. But she couldn't break into a municipal building on a hunch. Just as she decided to try calling Detective Sterling using her personal, non-Vance-linked cell phone, the phone rang. It was Nick. "Miss Higgins." His voice was sharp, cutting through the silence. "My forensic tech is showing a sudden network shutdown at the Vance house. Did you plug anything into that computer?" Clara sighed, bracing herself. "Yes, detective, a flash drive. I recovered from the Rose Garden. It was buried, presumably by the person who had JV lunch with Mrs. Vance the day she disappeared." A moment of tense silence stretched between them. "And what was on it, Miss Higgins, before you fried the system?" "Architectural blueprints of the Town Hall Foundation marked with a sealed storage area. I believe the theft of the brooch and Mrs. Vance's disappearance are secondary to a major historical land rights issue that Julian Vance and Silas Albright are trying to exploit." Nick let out a long, weary breath. "Blueprints. Of course. Look, Miss Higgins, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but that sounds like a fever dream based on a half-eaten cat toy. We're tracking Julian Vance now, and..." Crack! Boom! A deafening clap of thunder erupted directly overhead, shaking the old house violently. The lights flickered, plunged the house into darkness, then flickered back on with a sickly orange glow. Outside, the clear afternoon had vanished. The sky was the color of bruised slate, and rain was now sheeting against the windows with aggressive force. A full-blown Willow Creek summer tempest had arrived without warning. "Detective, I have to go," Clara said quickly, adrenaline spiking. "A severe storm just hit. I have to secure Mittens." "Stay put, Clara. Don't do anything reckless. I'm sending a uniformed officer to check in on the situation," Nick ordered, but the line was already sputtering with static. Clara hung up and dashed towards the laundry room, the usual safe space for animals during high winds. She found Mittens not in his usual woven basket, but cowering low to the ground near the large, antique mudroom window. The Himalayan cat, usually a picture of stoic grace, was completely undone.
His body was trembling violently, his eyes wide and black. The terrifying volume of the thunder and the flashes of lightning reflecting off the house's glass sent him spiraling into a primeval panic. Mittens suddenly let out a high, distressed caterwaul, a sound of absolute fear, and made a wild, desperate leap. The large window wasn't latched securely, the old mechanism was sticky, and Mittens hit the glass with enough force to pop the latch. The window swung open with a screech of rusty hinges, letting in a furious blast of wind and rain. Before Clara could even shout his name, the massive, snow-white cat was gone, a blur of panicked fur vanishing into the black garden. "Mittens, no!" Clara yelled, fighting the blast of wind to slam the window shut. Her detective work vanished instantly, replaced by sheer panic. Mittens was an indoor cat. He wouldn't survive 5 minutes in this weather, let alone the dangers of the neighborhood, cars, other animals, or the sheer terror of the storm. Clara snatched up her raincoat and a heavy-duty flashlight. She ran out the front door, the rain instantly soaking her. She searched the immediate perimeter, checking under the porch, shouting his name into the gale. She stumbled back onto the front steps, defeated, when her flashlight beam caught something on the high, wrought iron railing of the front veranda. Snagged on a sharp curl of the ironwork high off the ground was a single, long, pristine white hair, undeniably Mittens' hair. He hadn't run low to the ground, seeking shelter under a bush. Driven by the primal fear of the thunder and lightning, Mittens had scaled the nearest object and used the high veranda railing as a launch point, bolting up and away from the immediate grounds. He was seeking a high, dry, dark sanctuary, a place of absolute, enclosed safety that the house no longer offered. Clara suddenly recalled the blueprint image. The town hall, just 3 blocks away, a towering, heavy stone building with a massive, sealed founder's storage area deep in the attic. A building made of thick, dampening stone built long before modern fire codes. He's gone to the town hall, Clara realized with blinding certainty. He's gone to hide in the archive's attic. The thought was absurd. A frightened cat seeking refuge in the one place linked to a conspiracy she had just uncovered. But Mittens had always sensed the truth of this mystery first. The cat had not just found a hiding spot. He had found the missing piece of the puzzle. Ignoring the torrential rain and the now howling wind, Clara sprinted down Primrose Lane. She ran past Silas Albright's shop, past Fiona's B&B, her mind a frantic mix of fear for the cat and the dawning excitement of a breakthrough. She still held the flash drive tightly in her pocket. She arrived at the grand, imposing front of the town hall, her clothes clinging to her, her hair plastered to her face. The building was dark, locked tight for the evening. "Mittens! Mittens!" she shouted, the wind tearing the sound from her lips. She looked up at the high slate roof, then around the side. There, by the old, forgotten basement entrance, a small, unsecured maintenance door used by the archivist was slightly ajar, knocked loose by the powerful wind. Clara slipped inside, the silence of the stone building engulfing her. She was deep inside the town hall, flash drive in hand, looking for a cat who knew too much. She pulled out her phone to use the flashlight, but stopped. It was Tuesday. The note had read, Tuesday, 10 p.m. Clara checked her watch. It was 9:58 p.m. Her interpretation had been wrong. The note hadn't been a previous meeting time. It was tonight's meeting time. Julian Vance and Silas Albright were due to meet here at the town hall at night to access the sealed archive, and Mittens was already inside, waiting. Clara raced up the dusty, echoing staircase towards the ominous dark attic, knowing she had stumbled not into a rescue mission, but straight into the middle of a high-stakes, midnight confrontation. The true crime was about to unfold.
Chapter 10. Clara's heart pounded a furious rhythm against her ribs, echoing the distant thunder. She was inside the town hall, soaking wet, terrified for Mittens, and running straight into a criminal rendezvous. She fumbled for her phone, but the rain had clearly short-circuited it, leaving the screen dark and lifeless. The town hall was a labyrinth of stone and echoing silence. The only light came from the occasional flicker of lightning that briefly illuminated the historical plaques lining the main corridor. Clara knew she had to get off the main floor. Julian Vance and Silas Albright wouldn't choose the open lobby for their clandestine meeting. They were heading for the sealed section in the dusty historical archives attic. She found the narrow servants' staircase, hidden behind a velvet curtain, and began her ascent. The air grew stale and thick with the smell of old paper, cedar, and dust. Tick-tock. The mental clock of 10 p.m. was deafening. When she reached the second floor, which housed the main library and archival reading rooms, she heard a faint, familiar sound above her. A muffled, high-pitched meow. Mittens was up there. He had found his dry, dark sanctuary. As Clara climbed the final, creaking set of stairs to the attic, she pulled the small, black flash drive from her pocket, ready to use it as a makeshift weapon if necessary. The attic was massive, a cathedral of shadows beneath the high slate roof. It was crammed with relics, discarded portraits of past mayors, boxes labeled unsorted town records, and towering shelves filled with bound volumes of history. The only light was a small, grimy window barely keeping out the storm. "Mittens! Mittens, where are you?" Clara whispered fiercely. She scanned the room, the beam of her fading flashlight dancing across the decades of forgotten history. Then she saw him. Mittens was perched precariously on a stack of leather boxes labeled Founders Documents 1850 to 1910. He was perfectly dry and, miraculously, calm. He wasn't hiding, he was playing. He batted playfully at a piece of white fluff dangling from the corner of the box, a scrap of paper that had clearly been dislodged when he landed. It was brittle, yellowed, and looked exactly like the material of the cryptic note Clara had found under the floorboard. Clara rushed over, snatching the scrap from the cat's playful grasp. "You little menace," she scolded him softly, pulling him into a tight, comforting hug. She laid the new scrap next to the shredded paper from her pocket. Salvaged scrap 1. Dang blank, dang blank. 555. Tulip Lane, Tuesday, 10 p.m. Burn everything. The new scrap was the crucial top section, the piece Mittens had torn away at the Vance house. It was tattered but legible enough. New scrap. This document confirms the rightful ownership of the sapphire brooch for the date of May 19, 1903. Clara frowned. May 19, 1903. A date. But the first scrap had a number followed by the street, 555. Tulip Lane. Suddenly, the pieces snapped together with a dizzying clarity. The note hadn't read 555. Tulip Lane. It had read, "This document confirms the rightful ownership of the sapphire brooch for the date of May 19, 1903. Meet me at the town hall entrance on Tuesday, 10 p.m. Burn everything." Wait, no, that still didn't make sense. She looked back at the first torn scrap, focusing on the numbers. The remnants of the top of the note were missing. She looked at the date again, May 19, 1903. She looked at the number in her note, 555. Clara slammed her hand to her forehead. The archives, the blueprints. The blueprints on the flash drive were labeled Archive, May 1903. The number was not an address, it was a date. Clara pulled out her historical app again, squinting at the dim light. She searched for Willow Creek's official founding date. Founding of Willow Creek,
May 19, 1903. The number 555 was not the address. It was simply the beginning of the number 1903 that had been torn in half, or perhaps a section of the document code where the 1903 was bolded. Or maybe the full date had been May 19, 1903, page 555. No, that was too complicated. She returned to her first theory. The note was not about a rendezvous with Julian and Silas at the tulip farm. The note was an instruction to whoever took the brooch to return the item and the documents to the archivist, Martha, who was the gatekeeper of all historical records. The brooch's ownership was being contested. Suddenly, a loud, deliberate click echoed from the bottom of the attic stairs, followed by the metallic rasp of a heavy key turning in a lock. Someone had just secured the attic door, trapping Clara and Mittens inside. The clock struck 10 p.m. Clara pressed herself and Mittens behind a towering stack of ancient ledgers, her heart pounding. Footsteps, quiet and measured, began ascending the creaking wooden stairs. It wasn't the heavy, agitated stride of Silas Albright, nor the confident clip of Julian Vance. These were light, familiar steps. The figure reached the top of the stairs, silhouetted against the dim light filtering from below. It was a slight, middle-aged woman, wearing a slightly rumpled cardigan and sensible shoes. In her hand, she held a large flashlight and a coil of heavy-duty rope. It was Martha, the town archivist, a woman Clara considered harmless, fussy, and utterly devoted to the history of Willow Creek. Martha didn't look surprised to see the attic empty of conspirators. She simply scanned the room with a professional calm. Then she walked directly toward the shelves where Mittens had been playing. She lifted the leather box of Founder's documents and revealed a small, modern keypad hidden behind the shelves. She entered a quick sequence of numbers. A low electronic hum sounded, and a section of the stone wall behind the shelves slid inward, revealing a small, dark, humidity-controlled chamber, the Founder's storage, sealed. Martha was the culprit. But where were Julian and Silas? And why was Martha going to such lengths? Martha stepped inside the chamber, pulling something small and glittering from a hidden compartment inside her cardigan. It was the Willow Creek sapphire brooch. They thought it was about money, she murmured to herself, her voice shaking with quiet, righteous fury. They were so busy looking at blueprints, they forgot what this brooch truly represents. It belongs to the town. It was stolen from us once, and I was simply putting it back where it belongs. Clara finally understood. The theft was not driven by greed, but a twisted sense of historical entitlement. Martha had stolen the brooch from Eleanor Vance not to sell it, but to re-hide it in the original town archives vault, believing Eleanor's ancestor was the one who had originally taken it from the historical collection. Martha was the perpetrator, but Julian and Silas were still involved. Julian's blueprints had tipped Martha off to the sealed location, and Silas's truck was likely used to transport the evidence that Eleanor might have been using to blackmail Julian. As Martha turned to leave the vault, she spotted a small, white piece of fur snagged on the corner of the wooden ladder, Mittens' telltale sign. She froze, her eyes scanning the dark space. Mittens, sensing the danger, issued a single, loud, defiant meow. The cat had not only led Clara to the scene, he had just given away her position to the culprit.
Chapter 11. The meow that betrayed Clara was loud, distinct, and instantly silenced by the crushing weight of Clara's hand clamped gently over Mittens' muzzle. But the damage was done. Martha, illuminated by the beam of her flashlight, stopped moving. The Willow Creek sapphire brooch, clutched in her hand, flashed a terrifying icy blue. Clara Higgins. Martha's voice was strained, barely a whisper of disbelief. You really are a meddlesome woman. What are you doing in the archives? Clara slowly stepped out from behind the stack of ledgers, holding Mittens tightly. The cat, sensing the shift from fear to danger, was now completely still in her arms. I was looking for my cat, Martha, she said, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. She motioned toward the freshly revealed vault, but it seems I found the missing brooch instead, and the missing archivist. Martha's composure shattered. Her eyes, usually kind and magnified behind her glasses, were wild with a zealous fury. She raised the flashlight like a club. Don't you dare touch that door. You don't understand. That brooch was never Eleanor's to keep. It belongs here, with the rest of the 1903 Founders Collection, and I am putting it back where it was originally stolen from before Julian and Silas can sell its true value to a foreign entity. Martha confessed in a rush, desperate for justification. She revealed that the blueprints on the flash drive, the ones Eleanor had intended to show Julian, proved the brooch wasn't just jewelry. It was a deed, a code within the setting of the sapphires, decipherable only by matching it to the 1903 town hall architecture, confirmed that Eleanor's ancestor, the town founder, had secretly claimed ownership of the town hall's foundation land itself, a massive, valuable plot, using the brooch as proof. Julian Vance and Silas Albright found out, Martha explained, her breathing ragged. They were going to use the brooch to force Eleanor to sell the land rights, probably to an out-of-town developer. They were going to meet here tonight to find the original 1903 documents that prove Eleanor's deed is legitimate, and then destroy them. The burn everything instruction was theirs. So you took the brooch to protect the town hall? Clara asked, moving slowly toward the only exit, the locked attic door. Martha nodded fiercely. I copied the deeds and contacted Eleanor. I told her the only way to save the land from her greedy cousin was to disappear long enough for the police to seize the brooch as evidence and lock it up here. She's not missing, Clara. She's hiding in a cabin outside town, waiting for the town to officially reclaim the brooch as an artifact. Eleanor wasn't missing. She was in hiding, staging her own disappearance to save the town's land. Clara finally grasped the full, convoluted truth. The mystery wasn't murder. It was an elaborate, historical blackmail plot gone sideways, driven by an eccentric but loyal archivist. But the note was Tuesday, 10 p.m. You're here now, Clara pressed. I was supposed to wait for my contact, an anonymous source I made to report the theft tonight, thus forcing the police to secure the brooch. But the storm gave me an opportunity to get here faster. Martha lifted the heavy coil of rope she was holding. I couldn't risk Julian or Silas getting here first. Martha suddenly lunged forward. Give me that flash drive, Clara. It has the digital copy of the blueprints. It must be destroyed. Clara reacted instantly, dropping Mittens and launching the flash drive across the dusty attic floor. The tiny black device hit a pile of metal filing cabinets with a loud, ringing clatter. Martha wheeled around, her attention shifting entirely to the electronic threat. No, it has to be erased. This was the opening Clara needed. She grabbed Mittens, who, recognizing this sudden noise and chaos as a prime distraction, sprang from her arms and streaked toward the open vault. Mittens, agile despite his size, disappeared into the humidity-controlled chamber. Mittens, come back! Martha shrieked, now frantic. She plunged into the dark vault after the cat, her flashlight beam swinging wildly. Clara didn't wait. She ran for the locked attic door, kicking at the old wood. It was useless. She frantically searched her pockets. The silver letter opener she'd used to pry the floorboard at the Vance house. She fumbled for it, jamming the thin blade into the lock mechanism, twisting and straining with all her strength. Click. The lock sprung open. Clara pulled the heavy door open and started down the stairs, but not before screaming at the top of her lungs. Town hall, attic, kidnapping and theft, call the police. She burst out onto the second-floor landing just as two sets of hurried footsteps pounded up the main marble staircase. Julian Vance and Silas Albright arrived simultaneously, both soaking wet, both looking utterly panicked, and both clearly here for their scheduled 10 p.m. meeting to destroy the documents. They stopped dead, staring at Clara, then at the open dark attic door and the retreating sound of Martha's muffled, frustrated shouts. "Clara, what in the blazes?" Julian started, but Silas cut him off. "The brooch. Is it up there? Did you tell the police?" Clara didn't answer. She simply pointed a shaking finger at the basement access door, then ran toward the main lobby exit. She needed a phone, and she needed Nick. As she reached the lobby, a flash of red and blue light illuminated the streaming rain outside. Detective Sterling, who had indeed sent an officer to check on her, had arrived, drawn back by the network shutdown and his own suspicion of the 10 p.m. rendezvous. Clara stumbled through the doorway, grasping the detective's arm. "Nick, town hall, attic, the archivist, Martha. She has the brooch. She staged Eleanor's disappearance to protect the land, and Julian and Silas are upstairs trying to destroy the foundation deeds." She gasped, utterly exhausted, the rain washing the dirt and fear from her face. Nick looked at her, soaked and breathless, then at the dark, imposing town hall. He pulled the emergency radio from his belt. "I need 2 units at the Willow Creek Town Hall now. I have the suspects trapped in the archives attic and the lobby. Initiate perimeter." As the sirens wailed closer, Nick looked down. Mittens, having made his own successful escape from the town hall and the scary archivist, had finally reappeared. He walked stiffly, elegantly, and without a drop of panic, out of the darkness and directly to Clara's feet, purring loudly. "He found her, detective." "Mittens found the thief and the truth," Clara whispered, collapsing against the pillar. Nick Sterling looked at the perfectly groomed, now completely dry cat and the chaos unfolding in the historical building, and back to Clara. He shook his head, a wry, tired smile finally touching his lips. "I'll file the report, Miss Higgins, but I'll be leaving out the part about the cat's superior scent tracking and the duck pate." The town hall lobby was a chaotic symphony of police activity. Yellow tape, radios crackling with static, and the muffled sound of Martha, the archivist, being read her rights upstairs, punctuated the storm's slow retreat. Julian Vance and Silas Albright were being detained separately. Their conspiracy to use the brooch and blueprints to seize the town hall land unraveled by a frantic pet sitter and a panicked cat. Detective Nick Sterling looked every bit the professional, standing in the marble lobby, issuing quiet, authoritative commands into his radio. He dismissed the 2 officers who had escorted Clara to a dry wooden bench, and then he turned to her. "The brooch is secure. Mrs. Vance has been contacted at her hiding spot. She's safe, though she'll be facing a few questions about staging a disappearance and aiding a felon," Nick said, running a tired hand through his damp hair. He paused, looking down at Clara, who was holding Mittens, once again the picture of feline serenity, wrapped snugly in her raincoat. "And you, Miss Higgins," he continued, his tone devoid of its usual condescension, yet still firm. "You broke and entered, tampered with a crime scene, destroyed evidence, and interfered with the police operation. You were reckless, you were impulsive, and you endangered yourself." Clara didn't look away. "But I was right, detective. The truth was in the archives, not just the financial ledgers." "And Mittens found the way in." He sighed, a sound of profound professional defeat mixed with personal resignation. He pulled a business card from his wallet, its edges crisp and official. "Keep your theories about positive communication to yourself. I still operate in a world of facts, not feelings," he said, tucking the card into her still damp apron pocket. "But if you ever encounter another environmental disturbance in Willow Creek that involves a wealthy client and a potentially crucial animal witness, do me a favor. He leaned in slightly. Call this number and then stay put. Do you understand? Clara felt a warm, quiet triumph. It wasn't an invitation to partner, but it was an acknowledgement of her competence and a recognition that Mittens was perhaps more than just a data point. I understand, Detective Sterling, she replied, a genuine smile replacing her tension. Stick to the duck pate unless I hear otherwise. Nick almost smiled back, a flash of genuine warmth in his stormy eyes. Go home, Clara. You have a very valuable witness to care for. An hour later, Clara and Mittens were back in the hushed opulence of the Vance estate. The police tape was gone, the floorboard was quickly, if amateurishly, hammered back into place, and the lights were shining brightly. The house was exactly as it should be, quiet, ordered, and immensely comfortable. Clara changed into dry clothes and retreated to the kitchen. She wasn't preparing any meal. This was a feast of resolution. She plated a perfect portion of the organic duck pate, topping it with a precise scattering of the much-coveted freeze-dried Pacific salmon strips. She set the plate down for Mittens, who approached it with the gravity of a connoisseur. He sniffed the duck, then the salmon, then looked up at Clara, his massive blue eyes luminous. He began to eat, slowly and deliberately, restoring the established order of his universe. Clara watched him, realizing that her life had changed. She had proven that her unconventional methods worked. She was a pet sitter, yes, but she was also a translator of the silent world, a detective of the domestic sphere. She pulled Nick's card from her apron, the ink slightly blurred by the rainwater. She read the name, then smiled as she gently stroked Mittens' silky fur. You did well, Sherlock Holmes. You found the town hall, you outsmarted a Grady cousin, and you terrified an archivist into a confession. Now, we eat. The quiet rhythm of Mittens crunching his hard-won salmon strips was the only sound in the house. Clara knew that the drama in Willow Creek wasn't over. People kept secrets, and animals kept score. And as long as there were pets with peculiar habits, strange anxieties, and stories only she could hear, Clara Higgins, the pet sitter, would be waiting for the next disturbance to interrupt the duck pate. She was officially off the case, but she was ready for the next one.
So the town hall is safe, the brooch is secure, and Clara Higgins proved that intuition, a knack for interpreting feline anxiety, and a perfectly portioned serving of duck pate can outsmart even the most stubborn detective. Mittens, our furry, four-legged sleuth, finally got the high-value salmon treats he deserved. If you were gripped by Clara and Mittens' thrilling adventure through the town hall, please give this video a huge thumbs up. It really helps our channel grow and bring you more cozy mysteries. We want to know, what was your favorite clue that Mittens uncovered? Was it the suspicious cologne scent, the unique clay mud, or his final panicked dash to the town hall attic? Let us know in the comments below. Don't let the mystery end here. Subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you don't miss the next case for Clara and Mittens. And click the video on your screen right now for another captivating story.